Hello, can everyone hear me all right? Never sure with the mics. Okay, cool. All right, so good to see everybody in person. We've been doing this virtually for the past 2 years, so I'm a bit nervous to be speaking in front of an actual human audience for the first time after 2 years. But I wore my nice pants instead of my sweatpants like the last 2 years, so hopefully, we go in the right direction. Anyway, so my name's Jelena, and I'm the head of mobile, leading the product and the marketing side, and our growth squad at Hostelworld around the mobile apps. And before that, I was the CPO and a co-founder of a small fintech startup in Germany called Super. And I'll be talking about product leadership. The way I've structured this is to talk a little bit about some of the skills a product leader is expected to have, a little bit around how as a senior PM you can set yourself up for this change in your career, then a little bit about the lessons I've learned when I've started in this, and then some stuff that I know really good product leaders do. So yeah, we can start with some of the skills. And the first one, it sounds very obvious, but it's like you just got to be a really good product manager if you're going to lead product people. Very often, you're not going to be the best one. And that's totally fine. You can have better product managers than yourself in your team, but you got to be really good at it to be able to lead product managers. That's not to say, I've seen CMOs leading the product org or CTOs leading the product org, but very, very often they would have a product leader who leads a team of product managers directly, because functionally you should be able to do it. As I said, lead our growth squad at Hostelworld. It consists of product and technology and analytics and design, and I work with all these people as a so-called dotted line manager. So I work with them as a line manager. I have my regular one-to-ones with them, but they all have their functional team leads. If you're an analyst, I can't help you get a better analyst. I'm not able to. So you should have a functional team lead. So similarly with product, I believe that if you're going to be leading a product org, you just need to be really good at it to be able to do it. The second one, and even though these are in a bit of a random order, it's probably my favorite one, is around picking and leading great talent. So as a product leader, you need to know who are the people you need in your team to succeed. And you need to be able to pick out those out of the candidates that you have. When you say picking great talent, you're thinking, oh yeah, get some candidates, senior product manager, easy. But what I really mean is, okay, what are the skills that my current product managers have? What are the skills that we lack in the department? Product managers come in all shapes and sizes, in all very different backgrounds, very different skill sets. So you want to make sure that the talent you choose makes a lot of sense for the work that you want to get done, and that it complements the team that you already have. Or if you're choosing your first product manager, what do you expect them to be? Like, what kind of an all-arounder you're looking for? And then even more importantly, you need to get them into the team and onboard them, but especially lead them. I think the most important thing a product leader has to do is constantly develop the talent that they have in their department and constantly help them be better at the job that they're doing. I'll talk about this a lot more, so I'll just switch to the next one, which sounds pretty obvious, product strategy. When we talk about product strategy, we mean really all the actions that will get you to a certain goal in a long term. So it's very, very important to be able to think about the future and think long term. And the future is going to change all the time. 3 years ago, nobody could see coronavirus pandemic coming. It changed plans for a lot of companies. But the more you think about the future, when these kind of things happen, it's easier to make your adjustments properly than when you don't even have a plan and you don't even know what you need to change. So thinking about product strategy and thinking long-term, I can think goes a bit as a given when you're leading product. And then even further into the future, having a product vision, which is, where are we 10 years down the line? And again, this is going to change. This is going to, you're going to rethink your product. You're going to rethink your vision as you scale. But you always need to kind of have this long-term goal of where you want to go. And you should have your guiding principles and the ethical standards that get you there. So what I mean by that is you should ground your decisions in the principles that you have. And we'll talk about that a bit more very soon. So very often when I talk to senior product managers, they're like, oh, but how do I become a team lead? My team lead's been around for a couple of years. The company's not looking to hire another one. We don't need to have more product leaders in the company. And when I try to get hired externally, everybody wants somebody with experience. All true. Very often that happens. So there's a couple of things that I feel like every senior product manager can do to try to stand out, whether that's within your own company or when you're looking to go externally with your CV, the interviews and whatever. The first one's pretty obvious from what I was saying in the beginning. Just be a great product manager. Especially internally, think of it this way. Your team lead leaves. And your company looks at 10 product managers, 15 product, whatever many you have. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, these 5, they're really good. They're not going to even look at anybody else. They're going to start from who's really good among the product managers they have. So try to make sure that with what you're doing, you're just really good at what you're doing. Be a good product manager. Focus on driving your product forward. Focus on getting the results. Focus on running experiments so that you can show that you're able to think about different options and different alternatives. And when running experiments, I want to say, very often I see product managers run an A/B test with a goal of, oh, this variant won, and they're done. They're like, oh, my, we found the winner, we can move on. But like really sit down and go like, okay, but why did it win? What is it that made this one stand out compared to the other one? What is it that made this pattern clearer than the other one? Because that's going to help you run your next experiments with more knowledge and more information. And start thinking about your product in the long term, as I mentioned before. Very often product managers can focus on 6 months or 12 months very easily, but sometimes thinking 2 years in advance feels a bit too far away and gets very vague. So the more time you invest in thinking long term, sharing this with your team lead and talking. So can you hear me through the microphone, or are you hearing my voice normally? Because I'm a bit confused. Okay, cool. So think about your product long term, talk to your team lead and just go like, hey, these are some ideas that I have for a more distant future. What do you think about them? Do you have any feedback for me on how I should structure this? And work with them to try to understand how they think about a product. But also, what I've done when I kind of figured out that I really want to go into leadership is I've talked to my team lead and I've talked to my CEO who worked very closely with us in product. And I was like, well, I want to be a team lead in a couple of years. How do I get there? So what they've done for me, and it was a great lesson, was when we had a junior join the team, they told me, well, coach her. Figure it out. Figure out how we onboard her. By the way, she's never worked in product before. She studied linguistics. Figure it out. I was like, awesome. And then I've learned 2 really important things. One is it's very different to know how to do something versus teach somebody how to do that same thing. And having that experience of trying to teach somebody taught me how different you need to approach it depending on who the person is. We were very different personalities. We had different backgrounds. We had different way of thinking about product. So trying to kind of understand all of that and work with her to help her grow into her role was a good experience. Of course, it's not the same as being a team lead, being responsible really for her performance, but still was a really, really good first learning experience for me to be like, oh, okay, it's a lot different than what I thought it would be. And then in that same kind of conversation where I was like, okay, I want to grow, ask lots of questions was what I've started doing. And what I mean by that is when my CEO would come and be like, okay, we've made this decision, I'd really drill him down on why. Okay, but why did you do that? Okay, what data did you look at? And by doing that, and he was really, really open to give me feedback that I asked for, I've learned how to kind of, not how to manage a business or how to manage a product, but I've understood the difference in the mindset between me as a product manager and him as a CEO who kind of looks at data far more broadly, who thinks about how is a change in a feature X going to improve our revenue and lifetime value of our customer. As a mid-level product manager, I just didn't think about those, to be honest. And that kind of helped me change my mindset quite a bit in how I approach products that I work with. And then I've wanted to join a startup, so I did just that, went into a startup that only had an idea as a first product person, consequently kind of became a co-founder of it and the CPO who then built the product team. And through that experience, I've learned the first thing, which I know I've been talking about it quite a lot, but you really need to get to know and develop your team. What I mean by get to know your team is, you know how machines come with an operating manual? Like press this button to do that or press that button to do that, and by the way, never hammer it because you're going to break it. Humans don't, but there's a way to work and talk to each and every one of us. So get to know your team in order to understand what motivates them. In what environment do they thrive? What makes them tick and annoyed and makes it difficult for them to work? What is it that they want to achieve in their career? and try to like understand how to talk to them and how to work with them, because every single person you lead is going to be different. And if they're not, you probably didn't do a good job on the diversity piece before, and you've hired people with similar skills and similar personalities. But when you know all of this about your team, it's a lot easier to develop them. And when you have a team lead who constantly works on your development, who constantly focuses on making you better at your job, who makes sure you progress and you learn, you've got a happy team. Happy team means good results. So for me, it really boils down to being a really good team lead when you're in product leadership. And a lot of people think that at some point you have to stop learning. You don't. You always need to keep learning, and you need to keep developing the people you work with. And that's super critical. As you do that, you're going to build trust with them. And trust is very important. You want your team to come to you and say, I'm not happy with something you've done, with something somebody else has done. You want your team to have the trust to tell you, I'm really not feeling too well today and I'm not going to work much. You want to have a relationship where you trust them, that they're being honest. They trust you to be honest with you, but also the other way around. They trust you to have their best interest at heart, that you're not, doing stuff because the CEO told you to do and you don't care if they're overworked. And it goes beyond the team. As you can see here, like build trust with everyone you work with. It goes for your team lead, it goes for your stakeholders, it goes for every single person you work with regularly. You want to have the trust in which everybody knows that you're doing the best you can. And everybody can talk about it openly and give honest feedback and work through differences and issues that sometimes come up just because we're not aware we're doing something. So when you have that trust, it's a lot easier to work with people. And this one, when I say put yourself out there, I mostly mean that as a team lead, as a product leader, you're responsible for your team and you're responsible for your product. And one thing I've learned is you never put the responsibility on somebody on your team, or on, oh, but the engineers didn't develop it properly, or, oh, but they failed at whatever, or the analyst didn't do this. When you're a team lead, you're kind of like a single-threaded owner of whatever it is that you're responsible for. So when talking to senior leaders or talking to board members or investors, depending on what your situation is in your leadership position, always be the one that takes responsibility for whatever's being done, and don't put other people down. And at the same time, don't take on more than you can do. I've seen myself, when I first started as a product lead and people were like, oh, can we do this and can we do that? I just said yes to everything. I was like, yeah, sure, we can do it, of course. When do you want it? Tomorrow? Fine. And then you do a simple thing where you're agreeing with something that you just can't deliver. You don't have the resources. And then you go into the whole, oh, but I don't have resources. Oh, but of course we couldn't do it. Oh, but there was other stuff. Be clear about it from the beginning and be very, very focused on prioritization and on the things that you can get done. Because at the end of the day, you have the resources you've got, you have the team that you've got, you have the capacity you've got, you know what your North Star is, you know what your goals are, and just constantly prioritize to get to them rather than try to take on way too many things, over-promising and then under-delivering. And again, always make sure your decisions are based on your guiding principles. If you're somebody who doesn't like to be overworked, or if you don't want to overwork your team, then don't take on more than you can do, because then you're overworking your team. So make sure that what you believe in matches with what you're doing. And I think ethics are pretty important in product leadership. And never stop learning. As I said before, I think I even saw that question at some point in the morning, was like, how do you grow further as a team lead? And I think when you go into leadership, some of the hard skills become table stakes. They become normal. All of your peers who are heads of product, or at least most of them, should be good product managers, should be good at managing stakeholders. Like all of these kind of regular skills should be there. But there's always more to learn. And when you think about it, we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. And very often we focus on improving our weaknesses so people don't see them, or so that they don't stop us in our work. But I believe that it's equally or even more important to work on your strengths, because it's your strengths where you can get exceptional. Something you're bad at, you're probably not going to get exceptional in, no matter how much. I can't code. I've never studied coding. I'm never going to be a product leader that understands technology super deeply. I'm going to learn. I'll figure it out. I'll get good enough but it's never going to be my core strength. So balancing out, okay, there are things I'm not good at that I should grow in, and there's things that I'm really good at, but there's so much room to keep growing because there's always room to grow, is really important. And as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I hate public speaking. I'm really nervous. It always makes me feel awkward, even when I'm doing it within my company. But standing here and doing it makes it a lot better than it was a year ago, probably. So like constantly doing things, and they're important. As a product leader, in my case, you're going to talk to your company, you're going to talk to your board, you're going to have to present to people. So you got to be good at that. And I could try to hide and not do it, or you could try to, just go ahead and do it. So I encourage everyone to learn and step into things that they're not comfortable with. Now, I've watched a lot of really good leaders, so this goes a little bit on how they work. And again, I've been banging on about developing your team because I really think it's super important. But one thing I've noticed, my team lead leads a team of leaders. And he's still so focused on our growth. Like, he keeps pushing me to publicly speak. He's like, it's not bad, but you could be better at it. And we can totally make a good, storyline and do this and do that. And it's going to be important for your career. And if you want to have a startup in the future, you need to talk to investors. So he's constantly focused on how we can learn more. And I think at some point, some people forget about it. They're like, oh, well, I'm leading leaders. They should know what they're doing. They don't. So just never stop doing that. And these next few will connect a little bit to each other. One thing I've seen them do, these exceptional, really good leaders, they are very disciplined in the sense that they really focus on the goals that they've got. They make pragmatic decisions to make those goals happen. They own whatever's going good or bad, and especially the bad, but they leave the ego at the door. And what I mean by that is they come into a room with like, okay, guys, here's something that I think we need to sort out. They probably have 20 ideas in their heads, but they come prepared that their ideas are going to be really bad and that somebody is going to have better ones because somebody is going to have a better idea than you. So not being focused on their own solutions or focused on their ego or focused on protecting their ego from somebody seeing their failures is really important. And it's a good skill to have when you're leading a team of people, because otherwise you come across as a micromanager very often. Connected to that, they constantly think about innovation. They think about how do we come up with big jumps, not a 1% increase. And especially when you're in a bigger company, 1% or 2% makes a big difference year on year. But they think about how do we grow 50 or 100%. And when they think about these ideas, they're not going to come and be like, oh yeah, this is, we're going to launch a feature and it's going to be fantastic. It's not. At Hostelworld, when I joined the company, I was the first thing I was kind of told to do was we want to introduce social features into our app, and we've done that recently because solo travelers who go to hostels want to meet others. Awesome, cool, let's launch something. Some people are going to use it. Some people are already excited about it, but not a lot, and it's never going to be a lot. The important thing is innovation is about focused execution, about not trying an idea and then dumping it, but trying an idea and then hammering on it for 6 to 12 months, all in, fully focused until you see that it really works or it doesn't work. And very often companies abandon that if it doesn't work out the first time. And connected again, the constant curiosity, the constant asking of why. Why are people behaving like this? Why are our users doing that? Why are they dropping out here? Why are people asking for something different to what we already have? A lot of passion for solving these problems and finding these problems, and a lot of creative ideas on how to solve them, because that helps you know how to guide your team in the right direction and in the same direction, especially if they work cross-functionally or cross-product. And being very data-driven. So whenever they look at this, and as I mentioned, innovation, you got to hammer down and take time to figure it out. But by taking the time, you're actually constantly looking at the data. You're trying to figure out, okay, what's the data telling me about this first version of my release? And as somebody earlier said, if you're not embarrassed by it, it's not, you've released too late. So figuring out what it is that people like about it, what's the pattern that works, why does it work? And then trying to increase that is very important, and increasing that will happen with data. But I think data can be misleading. and I know that's a bit controversial sometimes, but again, when I first joined Hostel World, looking at rebuilding our apps, it was like, okay, let's remove features we don't need. We've been here for 20 years. Of course, there's things out there that are trash and nobody uses. So I took a look. There was a feature in there used by 1% of people. I was like, okay, 1% people click on this. Nobody really cares. Long term, yeah, nobody really cares. Let's just remove it. We launch, and the amount of emails my customer support team was getting and forwarding over to me was overwhelming. I was like, what? Because nobody uses it. Why are people so annoyed it's not there? And I was talking to my team lead, and he was like, maybe we didn't really realize what they use it for. So went back, looked into it. The data was still pretty clear, but talking to people, you realize that there's things that they use rarely, but passionately. So you're going to get people who are like, well, I don't really care about this 90% of the time, but when I need it, I really freaking need it. And then the feature's coming back soon. But having that good judgment to look at data critically and be like, okay, maybe there's a reason this is not being used all the time or every day. Maybe, people just need it sometimes rather than all the time. And to talk a little bit about the ethics that I keep mentioning, I think it's really important to have principles that guide you in your decision-making, to how you decide to do things. And we've all been witness of it, of dark patterns, of like companies people look at and go like, yeah, I really don't want to work there. I've heard bad stuff. So you want to make sure that as a product leader, you're also leading through your ethical standards and how you lead your team. And that's, I would say, individual. Each one of us has their own kind of things that are important or a bit less important to us. Especially in team leadership, but like, I think they're very important because they help you make decisions that are right. They're right for you, they're right for your team, they're right for the company, for the environment, for the world, depending on what you're doing. You're making decisions where you don't go, oh, we really shouldn't have done that. Not from the perspective of you made a wrong step, because we all make wrong steps, but more from the perspective of, was this the right thing to do? Or am I, harming somebody in one way or another? And dark patterns are a common example that can happen by accident sometimes, but when I pay for a yearly subscription and I wanted a monthly one just because it wasn't clear to me, I get annoyed as a user. And as a product leader, you should try not to kind of make those kind of decisions, but also you should hold your team accountable to those as well. Like, I talk a lot about nurturing your product teams, but holding them accountable for their results or holding them accountable for their standards is pretty important, because it helps everyone educate everyone how to make decisions, and it sets an example. I do not know why this jumped up. It sets an example of empathy with how you work with people and understanding for how you approach working with other people. And most importantly, always tell people when they're not making the right decisions ethically. Even if it's your CEO, even if it's somebody on your team, you have to make it very clear, okay, I think this decision's wrong. And that's part of the leadership, is having those tough conversations and making sure they are clearly heard and had, because they help everybody learn more. That was it from my side.
Great, so we'll definitely take questions now. So whether you want to do Slido or you want to raise hands, I can walk around with a mic. Does anybody have any questions to start for Jelena? All the way at the front. You make me gotta run.
I can do it.
Bingo.
There we go.
At the beginning, you said a product leader should be, or a good product manager. Could it be also that it's not really a good product manager because you need such different skills, let's say, for leading a team, making the best out of the team, individuals, let's say, getting them, improving their skills. So could it be still that a team lead or a team lead, product lead, isn't directly a good product manager?
Yeah, that's a good question. I expected that one to raise a bit of. Anyway, so yes, as I also mentioned, you could be a CMO or a CTO or whatever that leads a product division. But I do believe that there's a certain functional upskilling that your team needs. Because yes, it's very different being a manager. The skill set is different to being a product manager. But when you're working with product managers, and especially if they're a bit more junior, they need guidance on very basic product stuff, or they need guidance on how to be better product managers. So whether you do it directly, or you have a product team lead that works with these people to help them grow functionally, is, but I think it can work. You just need to have somebody who does the functional leadership as well. Like, as I said, I kind of lead an analyst and a designer and a tech team even. I work with them all the time. I even help or set up almost their objectives and like all OKRs and everything. But they all still have functional leads that they work with as well. Because that duality is needed for functional upskilling, I think.
Cool. So let's go to the board. Picking and leading talent in a small team with limited resources. Do you think UX and PM can be combined in one role?
Depends. If you get a product manager that's never touched design in their life, probably not. So it really depends who your product manager is. A lot of product managers have a good affinity towards UX, and that can work in a small team. I've done it in the startup that I worked at, but it doesn't always work depending on the skill set of your product manager, or the other way around. If you have a UX designer who you want to lead the product team, they need to have affinity for product that's different to that of the UX designer. So it really goes back to picking your team. Pick a product manager or a UX designer that knows how to do the other thing as well, and make sure you interview for both so that you can combine it in a role.
And I guess that's a good segue into, because I didn't know this until a couple of years ago when new leadership came in. The difference between a product designer and a UX designer is actually a different, way of life through the product development life cycle. Okay, what if you don't know, what if you don't have a time, 6 to 12 months, or a budget to focus on and iterate on an idea?
Depends how big is the idea. You're not going to get a 12-month budget for a tiny idea, right? Like, that's clear. I more mean those big, bold ideas that companies rarely make. I don't know, random example, Adidas going into metaverse. I'm pretty sure they're not going to get that done. And NFTs, they're probably not going to get that done within a month. So that's the kind of ideas I was referring to, the ones that are very, very big jumps. And then you need to kind of spend the time on it. If you don't have that much time, usually it's either a startup or so you're trying to iterate quickly. The good thing about that is you probably have also a smaller user base, so it's a lot easier to understand what they like or dislike, because you can work with them a lot more closely than if you're a big brand with hundreds of millions of users to get it right. Hope that answers the question.
This is a good one. Taking responsibility is important on the outside, but within the team, how do you present the mistakes of people and make sure they learn from them?
I'm going to say depends again, and I'll explain. I was talking about what makes different people tick in those operating manuals. You're definitely going to have somebody in your team who's totally fine receiving criticism in front of other people and in front of the team and maybe having a discussion around that. You're also going to have somebody in your team who needs to receive that feedback privately. I always opt to the side of caution. Make sure that you talk about the mistakes people have made with them directly first, and then figure out how you discuss that within your team. Whether you don't even mention it because it's going to make them feel very awkward and not make them very productive for a long period of time, or you find a way around it without calling somebody out or whatever. But like, it is important to learn from the mistakes made. It just depends on your team setup, how long they've been working together, how common it is to bring these things up, how the person who made the mistake would feel about it, to know how to best approach it. Sorry, I started reading the next question and got lost in my own thoughts.
What is the best product leader you happen to work with like? And I guess this means work with or mentorship.
Exceptionally good at making it very clear to you what you need to do to grow. Like, exceptionally good at that. Very motivating and energized, constantly, full of like really a lot of passion and a lot of positive energy that they bring on the table, so it doesn't make anybody stressed around them. And constantly full of too many ideas that sometimes need a lot of controlling. This is all the same person, so had to go into the parts where, he needs a bit of a calm down too many ideas. But it's a good thing because there's somebody who's constantly kind of throwing things around and making you excited about the future.
Just to piggyback off that, so Mark did have quite a few books that were up there in his presentation around product leadership. Are there any product leaders you recommend that, just even if we can't get their, a one-to-one with them, that essentially these folks could look to?
I think there's a lot, people, I default to Marty Keegan for everybody who starts with me who's a junior in product. I'm like, there, you read this, that's the first thing you're going to do. Other ones, oh God, why does nobody come to mind right now?
Petruilla, strong product people, I think is a good one. I don't know if anybody's read that, but that's a good handbook on product leadership.
I didn't hear you. I don't know about the rest.
What was it?
I didn't hear you.
This is a conversation now between people. Petruilla, strong product people.
Yep.
Cool. All right, what's your view on product leads going deep on topics? Should they guide their team to go into the details or deep dives themselves as well?
I'm not going to say depends, but it does depend. So, very often, if you're working with more junior people or with people who are not used to going deep, you have to do it yourself. You should do it with them, but you need to get involved. And sometimes, I go by the rule of 100 days. If you keep hammering on something for 100 days, they'll learn what you expect them to do. So spend 100 days going into detail with a person that never goes into detail, and I guarantee you they will start going into detail and you won't have to do it anymore. So that's rule of thumb that I have. If your team does it really well, there's no need for you to do it. It's a waste of time. So I think you can focus on something else. So it depends on that.
Great. How do you balance being a great product manager and doing product work while also coaching and heading others to be one? Leading others to be one.
Okay, got it. Well, if your product manager role requires you to work more than 8 or 9 or whatever hours a day, you probably don't have time to coach others. So the best balance you can find is either bringing this person along to your meetings and the way you do stuff. So you kind of combine the work you're doing with coaching them. So it's kind of like how programmers do pair programming. You can do something similar. Bring them in. So if you're coaching somebody, bring them into how you do things. Bring them into your meetings. Bring them into, like when you look at data, talk them through it and kind of save time in that way, but still give them the opportunity to learn, or start blocking out specific hours in your calendar when you're working with them. And if you're in an organization that does this well, your manager will be aware that you're coaching somebody, so they'll make sure that you have the space to do it. And if they're not, tell them.
Great. You know how to develop your team, but how do you develop yourself as a product team lead?
Ask everybody for feedback and try to make sure that you get honest, whether that's anonymous through some 360s or whatever, but you can always learn what are you doing that annoys your team or annoys your stakeholders or whomever else you're working with. Work with your manager to also point out any blind spots that you have, and honestly just give yourself the feedback and think about the things that you think you could be doing better, and then sit down and find the ways to do it. The same way you would get your team to go to a conference, read a book, expose them more to certain areas of work, do the same for yourself on the blind spots that you have. And always that's the 3 kind of key areas I would say. Other people you work with, your team, and your manager should be able to give you enough good feedback that you can take on and learn how to be a better team lead. But again, also ask your manager to help you do that because they have a good view, or they should have a good view.
Cool. How important is stakeholder management as a skill for product leaders?
Very. I don't like it, again, but it is very important. You're working with other leaders. You're working, depending, again, on your org structure and your leader position. You could be working with your executive team, your board of directors. You could be working with your investors. If you're working at a startup and you're a lead, you're working with your marketing teams, your sales teams, or whatever the way your organization is structured. And to go back to what I said, you need to have trust with these people and you need to have a good working relationship because you're going to be telling them no a lot. And they should be comfortable with that. And you should be comfortable with saying no to them. So having a relationship where you're fully transparent, where all the stakeholders you work with know your priorities, where all of them are aware of what you're trying to work on, and making sure that you keep them updated and keep them looped in, and also nurture that relationship of oh yeah, yes, we can do that, or yes, we can do this, so on and so forth, is super important because your success depends on having those relationships well built.
Great. Can you list the roles that you usually see in a team lead by a product leader?
Not sure I understand. Is it me? I'm not sure I'm following this one. Can you list the roles? What do you mean by roles in a team lead? Or in a lead, not lead, but led. Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah, that screwed me
sorry.
up.
I got, thank you. So in some orgs, that's purely product. In some organizations, it's more cross-functional. I have it cross-functional, and I really like it that way. So my growth squad is basically able to do everything without the rest of the company. Everything, of course, always goes under quotes. You work with other teams, but my growth squad consists of some backend work, Android and iOS development, because that's what I'm responsible for, analytics, product, marketing, design. I think I didn't miss anyone. So I work with them as their leader, in many ways dotted leader rather than direct leader, but they are the growth squad that I'm responsible for. And the good thing about it is you get to measure the results from all the different perspectives under one lead. But we do combine that with having functional leaders in analytics or in design or in technology, so that these people have somebody to rely on functionally, because I couldn't be that person for them. So I think these kind of matrix cross structures work really well. And I think product leaders are well positioned to be the leads of the cross-functional team.
Awesome. So maybe just a couple questions in show of hands. So how many of you, considering it's like a big, buzz title that's been going around, especially a few years, how many of you have a head of product title? Great. How many of you are senior product managers and you own the strategy for your specific portfolio? Cool. How many of you are product managers and you own the strategy for your portfolio? Wow, quite a few. Awesome. Always interesting to know, essentially from a product leadership perspective, what your role may be. And that's not, something that's sometimes a product manager versus senior product managers versus a head of product is, it's translated differently, but you own the same thing. But if there's no other questions, are there any other questions for Jelena? Aha, great. We're at time. Can everybody thank Jelena again for an amazing presentation?
Thank
on product
you.
leadership?